Everyone thought the husband had already won. His posture was relaxed, his voice steady. But as the judge read through the documents, the wife slowly lifted her eyes to meet his. In that silent stare, the truth shifted, and the courtroom felt it instantly. A current of unease crackled through the air, silencing the muffled whispers. His confident smile faltered for a split second, a crack in the flawless armor he'd presented to the world. From her seat, Alara saw it, the flicker of panic, the dawning recognition that she was no longer the pleading, heartbroken woman he'd left behind. For months, she'd been painted as the unstable, grieving spouse, clinging to a marriage he swore was dead. His lawyers called her delusional. His friends called her bitter. But they didn't know what she held. They didn't know about the ledger. Today wasn't about salvaging a marriage he'd already burned to the ground. Today was about justice. And as the ghost of a knowing, sorrowful smile touched her lips, the real trial was just beginning. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button and comment where you're watching from. The air in Courtroom 4B hummed with a low, expectant energy, thick with recycled air, and the scent of wood polish and suppressed emotion. Everyone's focus was on Lucas Thorne, a man who wore his victory not as a crown, but as a comfortably tailored suit. He leaned back in his chair at the defendant's table, his posture a study in relaxed assurance. A faint, polite smile played on his lips as his attorney, a silver-haired shark named Armand Greer, detailed the irreparable erosion of the marital foundation to the stoic-faced judge. Lucas's voice, when he occasionally leaned to whisper to Greer, was a steady, confident baritone that carried just far enough to be heard by the first row of the gallery. He was the picture of a reasonable man, burdened by the unfortunate, clinging weight of a broken relationship, ready to move forward with fairness, if not warmth. Across the well of the court, Alara Thorne sat with her hands folded neatly on the polished table. Her lawyer, Marta Rivera, a woman with tired eyes but a sharp mind, shuffled papers, her objections seeming more procedural than potent. The public narrative, carefully spun by Lucas's team over months, had settled over the room like a fine dust. Lucas, the ambitious, successful venture capitalist who had outgrown his quieter, more dependent wife. Alara was the emotionally fragile partner, struggling to accept the end of a chapter he had gracefully closed. He'd already moved on, visibly so. His new partner, Chloe, a sleek blonde in a tastefully expensive sheath dress, sat in the front row of the gallery, a living exhibit of his future. The judge, a woman with a steely gray bun and glasses perched on the end of her nose, reviewed a document regarding the preliminary valuation of the marital estate, the penthouse, the vacation home in Aspen, the investment portfolios. Lucas's financial dominance was a pillar of his case. Armand Greer had just finished statting, with palpable satisfaction, that his client was prepared to be more than generous within the bounds of what was legally his. It was during this lull, this moment of procedural mundanity, that Alara moved. She had been still as a deep-water stone for the entire proceeding, her gaze fixed on the grain of the wood before her, or occasionally on the back of Lucas's well-groomed head. But as the judge turned a page, Alara slowly, deliberately lifted her eyes. She didn't look at the judge or at Greer. She aimed her gaze like a silent arrow across the short, charged distance between the tables and met the side of Lucas's face until he felt it. He turned his head. Their eyes locked. It was not a glare of fury, nor a plea of heartbreak. Alara's expression was utterly calm, her green eyes holding a depth of knowledge so complete it was unnerving. It was the look of a person who has seen the final page of the story while everyone else is still reading the first chapter. In that silent stare, she conveyed everything she did not say. I see you. I see all of it. Lucas's confident smile froze. Not faltered, not faded, but froze, as if the muscles had forgotten their function. The easy light in his eyes flickered, replaced by a microsecond of pure, unadulterated panic, a rabbit seeing the shadow of the hawk. He leaned back an inch, a reflexive retreat from the force of her silent knowing. A faint, almost imperceptible flush crept up his neck. The shift was instantaneous. The energy in the room, previously tilted entirely in Lucas's favor, rippled. The court reporter paused, her fingers hovering. The bailiff shifted his weight. Armand Greer, sensing a change in his client's atmosphere, glanced sideways. Even the judge peered over her glasses, her gaze darting between the two of them. The crack in Lucas's flawless facade was hairline, but it had been witnessed. Lucas recovered, of course. He smoothed his tie, blinked, and turned his attention back to his lawyer, his smile returning, though it now seemed a touch strained at the edges. He shot a final, dismissive glance at Alara, this one laced with a warning and a sliver of that old, familiar pity. "This is your play," the look seemed to say. A sad stare. He settled back into his chair, reclaiming his narrative. But the seed had been planted. The courtroom had felt the tremor. Alara lowered her gaze back to her hands, her exterior still a placid lake. Inside, however, the memory that stare had invoked churned. It wasn't of a fight or a discovery of infidelity. It was of a quiet, ordinary ending. 6 months ago, the silence in the penthouse was a physical presence. Lucas had been gone for 3 weeks, a necessary extended trip to Singapore. His final suitcase, a sleek Toomey he'd overlooked, sat in the corner of his study. Alara, moving through the motions of a life half-lived, decided to pack it away. She hated the reminder. As she lifted it, the weight felt off. Investigating, she found the false bottom wasn't so false. It had simply come unglued at one corner. Inside, nestled against the carbon fiber, wasn't a love letter or a secret passport, but a cheap, prepaid burner phone, long dead. Curiosity, not yet suspicion, led her to charge it. When it powered on, it asked for a 4-digit code. She tried his birthday, their anniversary. Nothing. On a hollow whim, she tried the date his fund had launched, 10/12. The screen unlocked. What she found was not a trail of romantic texts. The messages were cryptic, jargon-filled. Phoenix liquidity event Q2. Transfer to Vulture Cayman completed. New PPM needs to mirror the old one. There were spreadsheets attached with labels like Investor Rollover Project Phoenix. The numbers were astronomical, making their lavish lifestyle look modest. A cold, sickening understanding began to dawn in her gut. This wasn't about another woman. This was about another life, a secret financial architecture built parallel to their own. The affair, she realized with a jolt, the fights about his distance, Chloe's smug sympathy, they had all been camouflage. Noise to cover a far greater, more dangerous sin. Back in the courtroom, Armand Greer called his first major witness, a Mr. Reed, a forensic accountant with the demeanor of a bored librarian. Reed testified in a dry monotone about the robust and transparent state of Lucas's venture fund and personal holdings. He used phrases like standard valuation multipliers and fully audited, presenting binders of data that suggested Lucas was not just successful, but legitimately so. Greer's point was clear. The wealth was real, it was martial, and Lucas was magnanimously offering to split it. The trap was in the framing. By focusing on the marital assets, they were silently dismissing the existence of anything else. When it was Marta's turn for cross-examination, she stood, approached the witness, and asked only a few soft questions. "And your audit, it focused on the declared entities, correct? The ones on record with the SEC," Reed agreed. "You did not investigate any personal ventures Mr. Thorne might have outside of these declared funds." Reed conceded he had not, as it was outside his scope. Marta nodded, as if this was a minor point, and sat down. Lucas's shoulders, which had tensed slightly during Marta's questioning, relaxed fully. He exchanged a barely-there smirk with Greer. Alara watched it all, her face a mask of quiet attention. She had instructed Marta to do exactly this, to seem outgunned, to focus on emotional points, to let Lucas believe the ledger, the phone, the terrifying truth of Project Phoenix were still hidden in the dark. As the morning session drew to a close, Alara's fingers drifted to the hollow of her throat, where a simple silver chain held a single, unadorned USB drive. It felt warm against her skin, a tiny, heavy nucleus of truth. She thought of the frantic, terrified weeks after finding the phone, her clandestine meetings with a cybersecurity expert she'd found through an old college friend, the painstaking decryption of files, the slow-motion horror of understanding that the man she'd loved had not just fallen out of love, but had built their life on a foundation of fraud. The other woman was a wound. This was a desecration. The judge called for a recess. Lucas stood, buttoning his suit jacket, his confidence visibly restored. He leaned down, whispering something to Chloe, who laughed lightly, a sound like breaking glass in the solemn room. He then glanced at Alara, his expression now one of almost benevolent pity. He had misinterpreted her silence, her lawyer's weak cross, her intense stare. He thought she was armed only with a broken heart. As the courtroom emptied, Alara remained seated for a moment, watching him leave. A firm resolve solidified within her, cold and sharp. Marta placed a hand on her shoulder. "You ready?" she murmured. Alara gave a single, slow nod, her eyes fixed on the door through which Lucas had just disappeared. "Let him have his lunch," she said, her voice low and even. "Let him enjoy it. He thinks this is the climax. He doesn't understand it's only the intermission." Her plan was clear in her mind. First, let him testify. Let him build his own gallows with his words, his charm, his lies of omission. Only when he was at his most secure, when he had perjured himself most completely, would she bring the lightning. The facade had cracked with a look. Soon, she would bring the whole edifice crashing down. The afternoon session began with a shift in the atmosphere. The morning's procedural dryness was gone, replaced by the charged anticipation of witness testimony. Lucas Thorne retook his seat, the brief recess having seemingly washed away the last trace of unease from Alara's stare. He looked refreshed, even jovial, sharing a quiet comment with Armand Greer that made the older lawyer's mouth twitch in a smile. He was back in his narrative, the successful man, patiently enduring a messy but necessary legal proceeding. Armand Greer called his client to the stand. Lucas stood, straightened his cufflinks with a practiced flick of his wrists, and took the oath with a solemn, resonant voice that filled the room. He settled into the witness chair as if it were his own executive leather throne. Under Greer's gentle guidance, Lucas painted a poignant, self-serving picture. He spoke of the early days with Alara, the struggle, the shared dreams. "I loved her deeply," he said, his eyes briefly meeting the judge with convincing sincerity. "But success, it changes the pressures, the demands. I was building something for us, a fortress for our future." He paused, letting the sentiment hang. "Alara, she stopped wanting to be inside those walls. She became withdrawn, suspicious of every business trip, every late night. The woman I married seemed to fade away, replaced by a stranger who saw shadows everywhere." He sighed, the burdened but benevolent patriarch. "I tried for years, but some fractures just can't be mended." Alara listened, her expression unchanged, but inside his words were like matches struck against the dry tinder of her memory. A fortress for our future. The specific phrase was a barb. He had said that to her once in the dark, holding her after they'd lost the pregnancy. It had been a vow, a promise of safety. To hear it now, twisted into a justification for his betrayal, ignited a cold fury that burned away any last ember of grief. Marta Rivera stood for cross-examination. She approached slowly, a file folder in her hands, seeming almost hesitant. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice softer than Greer, "you mentioned the pressures of your success. The long hours, the travel, can you elaborate on that, for the court's understanding?" Lucas relaxed visibly. This was safe ground. He expanded with apparent candor, detailing the grueling pace of venture capital, the constant pitch meetings, the need to secure investor confidence. "It's a 24/7 commitment," he said, shaking his head with faux weariness. "Funds like mine live and die on trust and momentum. Sometimes that means being in Zurich one day and Singapore the next." "Singapore," Marta echoed, opening her folder. "That was a frequent destination, according to your travel records entered into evidence." She pulled out a sheet. "In fact, you took 14 trips there in the past 3 years. That's a lot of momentum." Lucas's smile tightened slightly. "A key financial hub. Many of our Asian investors are based there." "And the Cayman Islands?" Marta asked innocently, consulting another page. 7 trips, also for investor relations." The air in the courtroom grew still. The Caymans were not a typical venture capital pitch destination. Lucas shifted in his seat. "Some fund structures benefit from certain jurisdictional efficiencies. It's standard practice." "Standard practice," Marta repeated, her tone neutral. She then introduced a new exhibit, a simplified timeline she had created, matching Lucas's travel to cryptic entries from the ledger Alara had provided. She didn't show the ledger itself, only her chart. "So, this trip to Singapore in April of last year, coinciding with what you called a liquidity event in your fund's quarterly report. That was about standard investor relations. Lucas's eyes darted to the chart. He hadn't been provided this. He could see the dates aligned perfectly with transactions he knew were labeled in the hidden ledger as Phoenix Capital Seed Transfer. A fine sheen of perspiration appeared on his temple. I would have to review the specific context. There are many moving parts. Of course, Marta said, her voice still mild. Many moving parts. She let the phrase hang. You also mentioned building a fortress, a vivid metaphor. Would you say that protecting your investors' assets is a key part of that fortress wall? Absolutely, Lucas said, too quickly grabbing the lifeline. And transparency with those investors is part of that protection. It's fundamental. Marta nodded, as if satisfied. She turned and walked back to her table, where Alara sat, her gaze fixed on Lucas. Marta picked up a single piece of paper. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would like to call a brief rebuttal witness to speak to the culture and practices at Mr. Thorne's fund to help the court understand this pressure, he describes. Greer objected vehemently, but the judge, intrigued by the line of questioning, allowed it. Keep it brief, Ms. Rivera. The witness was Daniel Porter. He was in his late 20s, with an intelligent face now etched with anxiety. He had been a junior analyst at Thorne Capital for 2 years before leaving abruptly 6 months ago. Alara had found him through a professional network, a discarded piece of Lucas's empire who had left with a bitter taste. He'd been reluctant, but a subpoena and a promise of protection had secured his presence. Daniel's testimony was a controlled earthquake. He confirmed the intense pressure, but not for legitimate business. It was all about Project Phoenix, he said, his voice shaky at first, then gaining strength. Mr. Thorne was obsessed. It was a separate portfolio off the main books. We were told it was for special, high-risk opportunities and to use encrypted channels for all communication about it. The returns it supposedly generated. They were used to inflate the performance of the main fund, to attract new investors. Greer was on his feet, objecting, shouting, hearsay, and disgruntled former employee. The judge overruled, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses as she looked at Lucas. And these special opportunities, Marta pressed, did they involve frequent coordination with entities in Singapore or the Cayman Islands? All the time, Daniel said. The wiring instructions, the compliance paperwork, it all pointed there. It felt off. When I asked for clearer audits, I was sidelined. Then, after the last quarter's numbers were published, the ones that won the VC Innovator Award, I was let go, officially for cultural misfit. Lucas's face was ashen. His hands, which had been resting calmly on the arms of the witness chair, were now gripping them, his knuckles white. He stared at Daniel with a look of pure, venomous betrayal. The confident veneer had shattered. He looked like a man watching his carefully constructed set pieces catch fire on stage. The courtroom erupted in muted chaos. Reporters scribbled furiously. Chloe in the gallery had gone pale, her hand over her mouth. The judge's gavel cracked down, restoring a tense order. During the ensuing procedural wrangle, a flashback seized Alara, not of evidence or lies, but of the bone-deep betrayal that made this more than a financial crime. It was their 10th anniversary. Lucas had forgotten, truly, genuinely forgotten, lost in the final push for Project Phoenix's first major close. Alara had made dinner, put on the dress he once loved, waited. He'd stumbled in near midnight, reeking of cigar smoke and single malt scotch, buzzing with triumph. He hadn't even seen the candles. You wouldn't believe the day I've had, he'd begun, already narrating his own legend. She had looked at him, this stranger in her husband's skin, and felt not anger, but a profound, hollow grief. The vow he'd broken that night wasn't to remember an anniversary. It was the vow to see her, to exist with her in the same world. The financial fraud was just the grotesque, flowering weed that had grown from that poisoned ground. Back in the present, the judge called for a recess to consider the implications of Daniel's testimony. As the room stirred, Lucas stood from the witness chair unsteadily. He walked past Alara's table, his gait no longer a swagger. He stopped, leaning down close, his voice a low, furious rasp meant only for her. "You vindictive bitch! You're destroying everything." Alara didn't flinch. She turned her head and met his eyes once more. This time, her gaze held no mystery, only a flat, final truth. "You did that yourself, Lucas. I'm just turning on the lights so everyone can see the wreckage." He straightened up, recoiling as if slapped. Armand Greer quickly took his arm, steering him away towards a side door, towards a huddle of panic. Marta leaned toward Alara, her eyes alight with a fierce hope. "We have them on the ropes. The judge is skeptical. We should move for a dismissal of his financial claims based on fraud." Alara shook her head slowly, her hand going to the USB drive beneath her blouse. "Not yet. He's scared, but he still thinks he can talk his way out of it. He still thinks this is about hiding money from a divorce." She looked toward the door where Lucas had disappeared. "We need him to lie one more time on the record definitively. We need him to deny the existence of Phoenix entirely." A cold, tactical clarity settled over her. His lawyer is arrogant. He'll try to reclaim the narrative, to attack Daniel's credibility. Let them commit. When the court reconvened, Armand Greer, his face flushed with strategic aggression, did exactly as Alara predicted. He launched into a passionate speech, dismissing Daniel Porter as an incompetent, bitter liar whose testimony was a fantasy concocted by a desperate opposing counsel. Then, in a theatrical flourish of faux transparency, he declared, "Your Honor, my client has nothing to hide from this court or his investors." To put these scurrilous, defamatory insinuations to rest once and for all, we are prepared to offer a full and open accounting of every single financial interest, every entity, marital or otherwise, that my client has any beneficial stake in. The truth will vindicate him completely. It was the fatal misstep. The judge, eyebrows raised, looked to Marta. "Ms. Rivera, any objection to this expansive offer?" Marta stood. "No objection at all, Your Honor. In fact, we welcome it." She then turned and looked at Alara. "Given the sweeping nature of the allegations now concerning my client's financial security, I request permission to recall Mrs. Thorne to the stand. There are new points of inquiry, directly relevant to this full accounting, that have just arisen." The judge granted permission. A heavy silence fell as Alara stood. Every eye in the room followed her as she walked the short distance to the witness stand. She moved with a quiet, unwavering certainty. Lucas, back at his table, watched her go, his earlier fury now mingled with a dawning, primal dread. He saw the way she held herself, not like a victim, but like a witness for the prosecution. As she settled in the chair, smoothed her skirt, and lifted her face, composed and ready, he finally understood. The starring, the silence, the weak cross-examinations, it had all been a trap. And he had walked straight into it, blind and arrogant to the very end. The gavel was in her hand now. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, a vacuum that swallowed all sound. Every creak of the old wooden benches, every rustle of paper, seemed amplified as Alara Thorne took her seat in the witness chair. She adjusted the microphone with a calm, deliberate motion, her hands steady. She did not look at Lucas. Her focus was entirely on Marta Rivera, a silent partnership forged in months of secret preparation and shared resolve. "Mrs. Thorne," Marta began, her voice clear and measured, cutting through the tense quiet. "You've heard Mr. Thorne's testimony about the state of your marriage and his business. You've also heard the testimony of Mr. Porter regarding a so-called Project Phoenix. Prior to today, had you ever heard of Project Phoenix?" Alara's gaze was level. "No, not by that name." A slight, relieved exhalation came from Lucas's table. Armand Greer's posture loosened a fraction. "But," Alara continued, the single word snapping all attention back to her, "6 months ago, after my husband had moved out, I was packing a forgotten suitcase of his. I found a prepaid cellular phone hidden within it." "Objection," Greer boomed, leaping to his feet. "Relevance, this is a fishing expedition into private property." The judge peered over her glasses. "You opened the door to a full financial accounting, counsel. I'm allowing a wide latitude. Overruled. Continue, Mrs. Thorne." Alara described the phone, the failed passcode attempts, the final successful try using his fund's launch date. She spoke not with dramatic flair, but with the chilling precision of a scientist reporting data. The messages were not personal. They were instructions. Wire transfer confirmations to numbered accounts in the Cayman Islands. References to liquidity swaps and mirrored PPMs, private placement memorandums. There was a digital ledger. It listed inflows and outflows under the heading PX. The sums were in the tens of millions. A murmur rippled through the gallery. The judge did not silence it. She was leaning forward, her eyes sharp. "And what did you conclude from this?" Marta asked. "I concluded that my husband was not merely having an affair," Alara said, her voice gaining a firmer edge. "I concluded he was running a separate, hidden financial operation. The ledger showed money flowing from the main Thorn Capital fund into these PX accounts, and then spectacular returns being reported back, returns that didn't match any legitimate public investment. It was a loop, a fraud designed to inflate the fund's performance and attract new investors." Chaos threatened to break loose. Greer was objecting constantly, shouting about chain of custody, hacking, marital theft. The judge's gavel cracked like gunfire. "One more outburst, Mr. Greer, and I will hold you in contempt. Mrs. Thorne, do you have this phone?" "I do not," Alara said, "but I made copies of the data. With the help of a licensed digital forensic expert, I decrypted and preserved the files." She looked at the judge. "I have them here." Marta approached the bench with the silver USB drive. "Your Honor, we move to enter this as Plaintiff's Exhibit 1. We also have a sworn affidavit from the forensic expert, Mr. David Chen, authenticating the data extraction process." The legal wrangling that followed was a blur of heated argument. Greer fought like a cornered animal, but the ground had vanished beneath him. His own client's offer of a full accounting had demolished any claim to privacy. The judge, her face grim, accepted the drive and ordered the court's IT technician to display the relevant files on the overhead screens. What followed was not just testimony, it was an autopsy of a deception. Columns of numbers, email fragments, wire transfer receipts, all the dry, damning paperwork of crime, flashed on the screen. David Chen, called to the stand, explained in plain terms, "This is a classic Ponzi-adjacent structure. New investor money in Fund A was used to generate fake returns for Project Phoenix. Those fake returns were then used to report inflated performance for Fund A, attracting more investors. It's a shell game. The money flagged here," he pointed with a laser to a series of transfers, "ultimately ended up in these 3 offshore entities, which are controlled, according to these signature authorities, by Lucas Thorne." Lucas did not look at the screens. He had sunk low in his chair, his face the color of chalk, a sheen of sweat glistening on his skin. He stared at the table before him as if he could vanish into the grain of the wood. The confidence, the relaxed posture, the assured smile, all of it was gone, stripped away to reveal the trembling core of a man watching his life sentence be written in real time. Chloe was no longer in the gallery. She had slipped out sometime during the hurricane of evidence, a ghost abandoning a sinking ship. When Alara was finally excused, she walked back to her seat. The courtroom was so quiet her footsteps echoed. As she passed the defense table, Lucas's head jerked up. His eyes met hers. It was not the look from the morning that had been a flicker of surprise. This was total annihilation. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, pleading, and furious all at once, the eyes of a drowning man who finally sees the depth of the water. In them, she saw the death of every lie, the collapse of every wall. There was no pity in her now, only a vast, quiet emptiness where her love and her rage had both finally burned out. She held his gaze for a second longer, delivering her final, silent verdict, then looked away, taking her seat beside Marta. The end came swiftly after that. The judge, her voice cold with disdain, suspended the divorce proceedings immediately. "This court is no longer the proper venue," she stated. "I am issuing orders freezing all assets, domestic and international, linked to Mr. Thorne and his fund. I am also referring this matter to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. This proceeding is adjourned." The gavel fell with a final, definitive crack. The room exploded into noise, shouts from reporters scrambling for the door, the frantic buzzing of Lucas's legal team, the stunned murmurs of spectators. 2 federal marshals, who had appeared during the final digital presentation, moved to Lucas's side. He stood on unsteady legs, allowing Armand Greer to drape a coat over his shoulders, not as a garment of power, but as a shroud. He was led out a side door, not looking at anyone, his head bowed, the architect of a fortress now marching into a cell. Later, on the courthouse steps, the afternoon sun felt foreign on Alara's skin. The cacophony of the city, the honking cabs, the distant sirens, was a welcome assault after the pressurized silence of the courtroom. Microphones were thrust toward her, voices shouting questions. "Mrs. Thorne, how do you feel? Did you suspect for long? Will you cooperate with prosecutors?" Marta stepped in front of her, a protective barrier. "No questions at this time. My client has no comment." Alara wasn't listening to the press. She was breathing deeply, feeling the air fill lungs that had felt constricted for years. The weight was gone. The terrible, gnawing secret was no longer hers to carry alone. It was now a matter of public record, of law and consequence. She looked at the skyline, at the glittering towers of glass and steel, many of which housed firms just like the one Lucas had corrupted. She felt no desire to be inside those fortresses anymore. A final memory surfaced, not of Lucas, but of herself. A younger Alara at a drafting table, sunlight streaming across a blueprint. She was designing a small, sustainable library for a community garden project, her face alight with a focus that was entirely her own. The joy had been in the creation, in the lines of possibility, not in the accumulation of what those lines could enclose. Marta touched her arm gently. "You ready to go? There's a lot to do, but it's on our terms now." Alara nodded. She reached into her bag, past the legal folders, and pulled out her own personal tablet. She woke the screen, ignoring the news alerts already popping up. With a few taps, she navigated away from the world of case files and into a private, cloud-stored folder. It was labeled Archive, MY Work. She scrolled through images of past projects, sketches, concept designs for airy homes and functional public spaces. A smile, small but genuine and unburdened, touched her lips for the first time in that long, grueling day. It didn't matter if she ever built another thing. The act of looking forward, toward a horizon of her own choosing, was creation enough. She turned her back on the courthouse, a monument to the ended battle, and faced the bustling city, a canvas of unwritten futures. Her own reconstruction began not with a verdict, but with that single forward step.